Lessons learned from the 2020 season, the off season, the crazy regular season we have in effect right now. Welcome to the Footballguys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons, joined by Jordan McNamara. And we're going to be bringing, with the fantasy regular season, we're recording at the time of week 13, finishing up with the final game of the week. But another crazy one, Jordan, and that means we're recording with NFL action on a Tuesday going on, which has been, I think we're 3 weeks or so, which we're still on pace for, what do they say, 256 and 17, which is the NFL's goal. And we're through 13 weeks. And you know what? Feel really good about the fantasy season ending on time and on schedule. And that's where we are. So I thought this was a fun time to take a look back. I know both of us track AWARP. And where do we end AWARP? The end of the fantasy regular season, because the playoffs are basically its own ecosystem, its own randomized 55, 45, 60, 40, 50, 50 type events that can go a variety of directions. It's the oblong bounce head-to-head theory that kind of connects to the NFL for us fantasy duelers. And so I have a big point, and I almost wanted to ask you kind of a leading question, to use an attorney term, that before I present my argument and my case for my first point here, which is 2020 unique in the fashion of how much we've seen week-to-week oscillation, reaction, overreaction theater? Is it specific to this year? Is it because as a society of seeing social media and having media and 5G in your pocket and everything is just at your fingertips, and you used to have to go to the library to look something up and you had to wait for something, and it's just, have we been moving in this direction? Or is that plus social distancing plus, everything that 2020 has encompassed so far, is all that the perfect storm for the ecosystem of what I'm going to call the DFS mentality? And someone actually said DFS, where the D stands for Dynasty, with so-and-so is the wide receiver one this week. And then a month later, no one mentions him. And then, just whoever's hot is now the it girl, and you no matter where you have them, you don't have them high enough. Like, I have seen so much of this stuff, and I'm not super plugged in on Twitter. I wouldn't call myself like on there all the time, even within, accounts that I regularly read what they're posting. But I see enough of this type of stuff for 3 months now that I don't recall seeing that previous years. So do you think it's specific to this year, or is this going to be the new reality going forward?
Good use of the new reality there. It's staying on brand. I like that. And when you said use of multiple accounts that you use, I was wondering if you were talking about burner accounts or but it's following. Okay, all right. So we're on. I was wondering if there were
unconfirmed.
If there was,
I want a burner account. That's going to be on my off-season to-do list. Have a burner account, and boy, is it going to be on fire.
You're just gonna subtweet your own tweets and be like, man, that guy's handsome. Like, so yeah.
It'll be the opposite. It'll actually flame me at all times. This guy's a dope. He's an idiot.
What does this guy know? It's a really good question. It's a psychological phenomenon, I'm sure, to some degree. Are we gonna, what's society gonna look like and all that stuff? I know I've been, that your phone gives you that, that update every day or every week or whatever, that tells you how much time on average you spent on your phone. I think it's up. I think it's up for everyone, and I think that's probably, I don't know if people are lonely from social distancing or whatever. That I do, and there's not a ton going on. We were deprived of sports for a while. I mean, all of that stuff probably plays some effect. Do we go back? I don't know. I would say, I think though, there's value, right? If you it's probably going to be somewhere in between, but I think there's value if you want to be like we call it the longest view in the room, right? Or you want to be the most patient, or you want to do any of those things that are basically different. And I think that there's a lot of value in being different in Dynasty, because you'll see a lot of these things, a lot of these narratives and whatnot that'll just sort of permeate and take over. And I've done it multiple times this year where I said, I'm new to rankings. Is this whole Brandon Ayuk, after he caught a pass the other night, like as wide receiver one overall, like is that how we do this, right? And I think you've done it, and I have noticed it a lot more. we'll see if it's something that continues, but I think it's exploitable in terms of if you can be patient, and this is a player that I think we're going to talk a lot about, maybe not necessarily tonight, but in future nights and future startup drafts and all that, is guys like Michael Thomas, right? They're undervalued. And I mean, just you look at like Dak Prescott, and like he's going to be a value, right? Just because it's the out of sight, out of mind factor. And I think a lot of those things, you get those opportunities. And I think this year it's even more because people are paying attention more and have got less going on.
And if you combined it with the typical offseason, which you said in passing, someone like Michael Thomas, or just these maybe mid-career players, not even last 1, 2, 3 years of their career or expected productive lifeline, that you put the we see in the off season with what we've seen leading in with the 2020 season, and all of a sudden we kind of said it in passing to each other. I mean, this could be one of the more viable explosive value settings for startup drafts, depending on your view. What I would say is, if you are going to be that young youth chaser in the early rounds, there's plenty of meat on that chicken bone for you this year. And guys that are really less risky. I mean, I think back to when Cordell Patterson was like in the top 15 after having some moments as a rookie. And we have plenty of rookie receivers that have done far more than moments, and they're going to go later than the early second round. So you have that comfort, but also if you're just seeking profile, security, steadiness of what is most likely to happen over the next 2 to 3 years, there's a lot, and it ranges deep. And so I think you combined with, again, that DFS mentality this year towards a startup season and off-season mode where typically the older players get suppressed. You put those two things together, and that's a multiplier. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 2 × 2 = 4 is what I would say. So you're going at a much higher degree. So that one of my lessons learned, and you actually mentioned it, is who are you building the roster for? I've made plenty of trades this year and plenty of trades in season. But what I've noticed is that the flip market, because I'm sort of rostering different things. I'm sort of looking for different things than the average Joe Dynasty league mate in my leagues. So I've noticed I've wanted to hang on to what I have. If 8 of my 10 quote unquote bench spots or whatever are running backs that are sitting there with no job and they don't get a lot of work every week, they're just sitting there. Then when they get that opportunity, it may be very specific and may be very tough to flip them. And you know what? I may want to start them depending on flex spots, my own buys and injuries. So, and you've mentioned it before, sometimes you have the perfect combination. Like I have the right number of running backs this week. Like it's down to the one. I don't have excess. This is the exact number I need. So I've noticed that in those settings, I don't really find an applicable trade market to sell that as opposed to use it. And we've talked before about, am I building a roster for the market, or am I building a roster for me and for my team and for my lineup for what I want? I want Dak Prescott or I want Mike Evans over the next 3 years. Even if the market says I'm not as interested as you, does that mean you shouldn't have them? Because will that make it maybe less fun? If you really want to get in there and mix it up in the trade market and, have the hottest commodity that whether or not they're going to outproduce the other player, that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about, is someone going to be rumored? Mike Evans, from this point forward, will never be rumored as the wide receiver 1. Not once. So you have to ask, are you okay with that? Let's clear out Godwin. Let's clear out Antonio Brown. Mike Evans is still going to be the wide receiver 1 for Tampa Bay next year. I think that's appealing. And if the market's going to beat that down, it doesn't mean I'm running for the hills and I'm selling quote unquote low or selling as the knife is falling, so I don't get cut and bleed to death. So I just those are kind of 2 points wrapped into one. But I'm not taking the bait on this DFS mentality. I think I'm actually going to turn stodgy over the next 1-2 years if this continues, and I'm going to build these unsexy rosters that are for me. I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to give 2 cares if I could sell off for profits or the market's never coming back, as long as the profiles and the price points that I'm investing in for startups or acquiring via trade make sense for me and my value board. So that's going to be one of my biggest takeaways, because I think people are running guys out to pasture too soon. I think they are not realizing profiles. And even if players are producing early, not all of them are sturdy, long profiles. And I think there are some stranger danger situations to still avoid within those.
Can I ask you, like, this is a question that's absolutely fascinated me, and it's basically what, and it's what does value matter, right? From sort of a, we're gonna go sig on the couch with this, but what, what does it matter what a player's worth, right? And we talk about this, who cares what your house is worth until you try to sell it, right? That's the only, if I'm going to stay here and live here, I don't really care what the day-to-day fluctuation of value is. And so people get into this. Well, Michael Thomas, he's a falling knife in terms of value, right? But doesn't that mean for basically,
you need more words? You say value, roster value, market value, trade value,
market value,
yeah,
I guess. Sure. Right. And so, but the flip side of that is, right, doesn't that mean that for the rest of his career he's going to be underpriced, right? He's going to be at a discount, right? If that's what we're going to say.
At a certain age, you're locked in, right? I mean, Tom Brady will never go up in value. Aaron Rodgers, I haven't checked. He's probably up from last year marginally, if I'm guessing, but he's not really going up. If it's around or whatever, he's not getting into the top 30 of a super flex. Like, so I just, those are important things to know. Whereas you could actually end up, just to take a Michael Thomas example, I mean, you could basically buy this offseason for cheaper than ever before. The following offseason, you buy cheaper than ever before to that moment. I mean, you can keep buying in and end up having decent exposure to a player that 3 years ago in his quote unquote prime of market value, you didn't own any shares.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, right. So it's not attractive. But to me, I think one of the things about our roster valuation is that, right, there's a certain lack of liquidity in it, right? Like, so we've identified as being undervalued having 2 or 3x running backs to wide receivers. Nobody does that, right? So the problem that you run into, and this is admittedly something I've run into, and I have to figure out a counter off of this. And maybe it's just don't care, but it's tough to trade Giovanni Bernard from like January to September, right? And when you do that a lot on your roster, that's sort of an illiquid time for those players.
Well, can I say one thing? So
yeah.
Interjecting. So it's not like all the backup running backs you have are like Giovanni Bernard, because from January until May, probably a third of those, maybe more, you might have some that are free agents NFL wise, and they just don't, they might turn into Peyton Barber, where they go to a depth chart and you're like, that's just not worth holding, even though I like the player or whatever. So you're still going to have some attrition going into your rookie draft where you're like, oh, they just drafted somebody in the 3rd round. Like, oh, I got to be out on this, So like, even if that is the week 1 plan, it's not going to be for very long, or maybe not at all. So I think you're going to have natural attrition through those running backs partway. But I get the rest though. You're going to want to hold those guys. And so you're locking yourself in, but you're kind of locking yourself in on the roster construction you want. So that would be one perk, I guess.
Yeah. And the question is like, how much do you, right? What do you value? And so for me, I value highly functional in-season rosters because I can, we know Giovanni Bernard, we know Wayne Gallman, we know Mike Davis, we know the litany of these guys, and Booker and Madison have let us down, but by and large, it's been a profitable strategy. And that's really what I
did. You sell any Geo shares this whole regular season?
Yeah, I did. I think I got a couple of thirds for him in one spot. I think I might have got a second. But by and large, I was using him. Like,
but I would imagine you value him still when he hits to a starting role and starting opportunity. You still say, I'm surprised you sold for a third. Was that a non-contender?
I think I got a couple of thirds in a non-contender. I think is what I got. But again, it's tough to sort of pull that trigger. You want to, all right, so you're contending and you want to sell him for a contender second. So you're helping out your comp. That's kind of a tough, right? That's a tough thing. Maybe the objective is to go out a couple years on it, right? That's kind of a deal that I like to do more. But the thing is like and that's the thing that I've learned to sort of, I got to figure out a counter, which is there times where it warrants, where running back volume isn't optimized, right? I think that that's possible.
Well, if you have so many that they're on your bench, I mean, in theory, that's non-optimal because now you have too many, but the next week you might be down 2. So you might be back to the right number or actually one short if you can go super flexy, with 4 or 5 of them or something. I have some of those leagues where I can start up to 6 and it's like, you pretty much need, I've had 1 or 2 weeks where I have more than 6, but it's nice to have those options. And then you can play matchups, right? I mean, then you can be like, yeah, this matchup with Gio, or now we don't have Joe Burrow in. Like, so now you can be picky, which I think is the good part. And I was actually talking to someone earlier today where you go, oh, like is so you have all of your streaming guys, and then you're being picky with your lineup, and then it was like, well, but is this? We were kind of talking about the same subject, and I go, but this is how you find Mike Davis. Like, yeah. So yes, is it a lot of work? Is it a lot of roster spots? But you tell me how often you can get someone that is impactful over a 2, 4, 6 week sample that you get for free. I mean, Darren Waller, right, was free and widely available that April, May, I remember. And then he rolls in and he starts producing, and that was 2 seasons ago. And now you're two tight end 1 or top 6 seasons now into play with that. But that out of the ether is hard to find at other positions, is what I would say. Running back, you can come around every August or early September, and you much more easily find. So that would be the thing. Now, yes, it takes a bunch of roster spots. And the other thing I would say is, what are you spending those roster spots on otherwise? Right? Having a bunch of wide receivers that you shouldn't really be playing or shouldn't. I mean, you might, squirrel finds a nut every now and again, and you happen upon a 25, 30 point game. Sure. But good luck predicting that. And who are you taking out of your lineup to do that? And then, low level starting tight ends that are going to be what? Other quarterbacks. I mean, backup quarterbacks, I guess, in super flex could be a way to go. In that format, they actually do have some liquidity. So I'm an aficionado for backup quarterbacks as well, or backup tight ends and 2 tight ends. Is that one of your big points?
Which, just the liquidity factor, and right, the attractiveness to other teams. It's just
is that appealing? Right.
Yeah. How do you value that? Right. And we call it sexy roster syndrome, right? I guess there's a value on one hand to have attractive pieces to other teams. But I think the market is far too worried about that. Far too worried about it. And it's just, I actually saw a tweet that came out earlier this week, and I think sort of hits it on the head. What's your favorite part of Dynasty fantasy football? Trading 30%, lots of draft picks 18%, team with young potential 15%, winning a championship 37%. Right. So again, how representative of that? But I do think
what was 30% again? 37% was winning the championship. What was 30%?
30 was trading. But
wow.
I don't think
it's like, I like working a deal and making a trade almost as much as winning a title.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
and
I trades during think that way. If you go 4 months in a league without making one trade and you win the title, you're like, that was nice, but
it's only mildly rewarding.
I had made a couple trades and finished second instead.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but it's, how do you, again, so that to me is an irrational market, right? Because I'm playing to win, and winning trumps lots of draft picks, trading, or teams with young potential. So to me, right, again, so that's how do you value what other people value to be attractive? It's totally, it seems like an irrational approach to me. Or should you be more of a market value problem?
Instead, it could, because you know what? I'm sure you could have more opportunities to make more trades if you live in someone else's universe, the ecosystem of the market. Or should we be more in our own little bubble and say, you know what, I might make a very specific 1, 2, 3 trades a year in this one league or whatever. And but I also notice, I mean, this combines with the DFS thing of, when you, because here's the thing, you draft rookies, and just because, and I have to talk some people down this time of year where they're like, oh man, so-and-so's been so disappointing, or look at all these other players that are doing so well. And it's like, well, first of all, I mean, I'm not one to come to if you're specifically wanting a rookie draft strategy about year one of owning that player. So that's that's a big part that, so if someone's a slow starter, there's many reasons for how did this 1 year go? And that can be blips on the radar. It could be the sign of something to come with veterans or young players. And I think it's important. So what I always like to do is compare AJ Dillon with Antonio Gibson. So Antonio Gibson, running back 1 for the season, through where we are. But he was blocked. AJ Dillon also blocked. And you see 2 extremes of how being blocked worked out, right? One guy got unblocked. And what was he? Autoplay for a good cross section of the season. Another guy blocked, stayed blocked. And to say that AJ Dillon, like all of a sudden now that's a horrible draft pick. And man, I could have drafted name a player that went that point or later. Sure. And have you had more results from that player? Almost unequivocally, name the player. Yes. Over the next 5 to 8 picks or whatever it is. But it's situational, right? I mean, some of these top, what I would say, look at CeeDee Lamb. Look at what he was doing with Dak Prescott. Have you been comfortable starting CeeDee Lamb since?
What do you mean? The Dallas Cowboys wide receiver 3? The third wide receiver on the team? Is that CeeDee Lamb? Oh, okay.
The guy that was startable, and the guy that was the number 1 dynasty wide receiver for a cross section of the season when Dallas was throwing the ball 50 times a week.
Right. And he was getting the third fewest snaps. That guy, right?
Yes, that guy. But people want to bang on Jalen Reagor is horrible. Well, look at what he's dealing with.
Right.
Miles Sanders is not surviving this. No one is surviving. I guess Dallas Goedert in a streaming way is surviving. That's all we have.
Jalen Hurts is surviving.
We'll see how much he survives this coming week. I want to see this. I want to see in rhythm from the pocket. Let's see this occur. So, but my point is, let's trade situations in some of these scenarios, right? I'm not saying Justin Jefferson isn't a good player. I'm not. What I'm saying is situation definitely plays a role. And so I've been, constructing some of these. Where were we? Where are we now? And what potentially you could have learned with guys like Chase Claypool, or Justin Jefferson, or some of these early guys that have shown more than maybe people were expecting. And especially where their rookie draft position was. And I think there is some constructive ways to refine what you're doing. But I would also say the guys that you believe in and you draft back in May, or, again, you're drafting rookies or second-year players in startup drafts, that there's a reason you drafted them. And I don't think, the next 6 to 9 months going poorly, meaning there's some infrastructure things, there's some usage things. He really hasn't had a good. That's the exact opposite reason to run away from somebody. And typically, I think you're going to get kicked in the butt a little bit, market value wise, because their probabilities, and I think a lot of people don't acknowledge this, their probabilities, Corey Davis's probabilities drop, the longer he doesn't produce or do enough. But it doesn't mean, you really have to examine it case by case and say, what's going on here? And I think Jalen Reagor is now a current example of, he's shown positive things, but man, that environment is toxic, and again, Miles Sanders, they're just not giving that guy any usage and he looks good. So I want to see factory resets in some of these. And again, we say with AJ Dillon, we weren't drafting AJ Dillon for the perfect storm. And I hope to start him for half the year in 2020. We were drafting the profile and being like, wow, this team had 0 current year needs at the position, yet they draft this guy in the second round. That to me is more telling than a team that had a giant, massive need that went towards a position because it was like, oh, well, they picked a guy at the position that they have a huge hemorrhaging need. Okay, I get it. To me, it's more interesting when it's like, oh, they drafted their running back 3 in the second round. Your ears perk up. You're like, they have some big master plan and they really like this player. Obviously they probably do with Jordan Love more so than maybe the draft position or more than most of the other NFL teams, as another just sort of side topic there.
Yeah. Yeah. The other lesson that I would have from this class would be, I think similar profiles, when they go at massively different prices, I think you have to be on that. So whether that's Joe Burrow going 101, 102 and Justin Herbert going 110, right? I think you have to figure out a way to exploit that.
Josh Allen years ago, what was that, 2 or 3
Josh
years
Allen,
ago?
Daniel Jones, right? Those when those situations open up, I think you have to figure out a way to exploit them. And I'll say this, like, I sort of look back on this draft, and so I've been thinking a lot about this, about if I were to redo this, how would I redo it? And you don't just say you draft Herbert ahead of Tua. That's not what I would say. But going back, right? If I with the research I've done since and sort of thinking about it more and more, and this is constantly growing. Like, I'll never say that like I got it right, because we're just trying to figure out. I think a lot of it is understanding we don't know very much. And
today's right is tomorrow's wrong, right? Some of these dynasty trades or decisions flip-flop 3 times in 24 months.
Right. Or in 24 hours. Right. But yeah, definitely in 24 months. And so I mean, there's a lot that we don't know, and we don't control anything. Right. So how do you sort of deal in a world like that? Well, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think a lot of it is playing across profiles. And so one of the mistakes I think that I made was, right, there was an opportunity to open up value on, 101. And maybe that wasn't to take Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor. Maybe it was to take, and these are proxies because we really like Taylor, but these are proxies for different discussions. It is, hey, you can drop down to 105, 104, whatever, take Swift, take that round 2 running back that's really good, and trade for a later pick and get Herbert, right? And then you've double collected. And so that's something I have to think more and more of. So the wide receiver position, that was doable this year, right? You could, and I did this in a handful of spots, basically leveraged off of Judy and Lamb and went to Jefferson and Rager, right? And I think doing that is something that you really need to do. And sort of the more I look at it, right, like we can be really certain and do all this research and stuff, but then you go and look at profiles, and ADP doesn't end up being statistically significant. Like when you compare inside of like specific profiles, and maybe that's sample size or whatever. But when you think about that, like, all right, everyone's drafting them at the top, but they're the same profiles, and the market hasn't ever really shown to be that much better than random, or any better than random. So why are we doing that, right? So that's one thing that I'm trying to figure out more and more how to exploit. And maybe this year's a good example, right? Like this year is setting up to, and you follow the draft more than I do this early, but maybe this year is setting up to be a huge wide receiver year, right? Where we've get, if we're going to get 5, 6, 7, 8 first round wide receivers, right? There's a lot of opportunity to exploit that, which is take the last one, take Brandon Ayuk, right? Figure out ways to do that stuff more and more. That's a lot of the lesson that I've learned from this year, is when you have optionality, it's highly valuable, and try and figure out ways to hit it more than once.
Yeah, and just kind of looking back at rookie draft board. And yeah, so the other thing I was going to say for the lesson is, just looking at that situation profile and the perfect storm capacity. Looking at and again, I wrote an article this week, but one of them was on Chase Claypool. So what did we miss with Chase Claypool? Because I have 0 rookie draft shares. Actually, I think I still have 0 total shares. But so what did I miss, or what did we, the collective, not drafting him until 210, 212, 305, whatever it was, we didn't, collectively, he fell a lot as a guy that was drafted in the top 50. Now, what I would say is, so he went to a team. So to break this down, he's a unicorn, right? And I kind of hearken this to Derrick Henry was a unicorn, right? Like what? He plays what position? And AJ Dillon is the same sort of way. He plays what position at what
Outside
size with what movement? Right. And
Right.
and wide receivers, you don't get a lot of these reps. And I don't mean like the guy that's he's 6'3", 217 pounds, and no, like he was a 99 percentile in my model athlete, 235 plus pounds. Like, so was he boom bust? Absolutely. But the key was price. He didn't go Henry Ruggs price, right? Which was 111, 112, 202. No. You got him way later. So the price point of making the juice worth it. And then the other part was, well, this is a team that just pounds day 2 wide receivers, and they get a lot of them right. And by right, I mean they get more value from that than the NFL teams. And looking at, well, Juju Smith, and even if you say he's completely blocked, you can say, well, James Washington's been pretty up and down, so far. And you can say, well, Deontay Johnson, like he's not as good as maybe the usage he receives. And then you say, well, Juju Smith-Schuster is a free agent this coming off season. So what if they're just backfilling? But you say the attachment to the strong quarterback, right? That cures a lot. I mean, I already talked about attachment or non-attachment to a quarterback with Jalen Reagor. You can say that Justin Jefferson, he's got attachment to a quarterback, and that can be a big difference. Situationally, situations change, but quarterbacks change a little slower for the top 12, 16, 18 teams in the NFL. Generally pretty sticky. So going to that setting, locked in with a rookie contract, is a factor. And that's definitely one that I know situationally, I don't put a whole lot into, but that is a factor. And with Chase Claypool, you say locked in there, but you also say historically rare, which like Lamar Jackson, like some of these other guys, you say that could lead to historically rare outcomes as well. As you say, fat tails, right? So if you can get late second, third round rookie pick that has look at the profile, and just because he didn't do it enough and early enough at Notre Dame, but you say a 99 percentile size movement guy, and you put him with a good quarterback, you say, well, what's the potential there? Well, I think, in moments in games this year, we're seeing what that potential is. Now, does that perpetuate for the next 3 years? I mean, who knows? But it gets you a spike where, I mean, now you have lots of options, and goes back to your point of now you have market liquidity and for giant profits. So independent if you truly love the player and they check every single box, but frankly, late second, third round, fourth round, you're not going to get checks all the boxes. That's why they're not going 106 or 102. I mean, generally the bulletproof, and same thing as NFL drafts, the bulletproof guys are high and the guys with 1, 2, 3 demerits and some large ones, that's why they go later. And that's why it's, they're high variance and there's risk, whether it's off the field or otherwise. That would be one of my things, just to use Chase Claypool as a real life example this year of being more open to that. Instead of, I remember late second round, going towards, Anthony McFarland, which I know we've talked about before. You're like, Chad owns way more Anthony McFarland than I do. And it was like, well, I like the profile. You go running back over wide receiver. That's historically a good play, especially for year one and early stuff, or Joshua Kelly, but they just kind of blend into the backdrop of their position. They're close to just guys. And then you say, well, Chase Claypool, could he be a cataclysmic failure and flame out? Sure. But you're also missing high, right? You're missing, what is it? Missing strongly, aggressively. You're missing, by taking a pullback Stephen Curry 30-foot jump shot. You're missing that way on the game-winning shot with Chase Claypool. But you could also hit big, be a hero, and and have that GIF live forever by drafting Chase Claypool. So that's one self-scouting, kind of going back. And again, you don't get a Chase Claypool every year. So this is not something, I'll just take this, and apply it directly to 2021. That's not what I'm saying. But when they come around, right. Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, like I sold Lamar Jackson with a friend of ours in a co-league, and we sold Lamar Jackson, for a quote unquote profit. And like, it's like, no, you hold that even at start one. Like you say, right. This could be what I even told myself. I was on Lamar Jackson and I sold some shares where it's like, oh, well, he's going to get broken. He's just he can't throw. He can't throw very well. But it's like, but if you run for 1,200 yards or something, it doesn't really matter. Like, he's a rare one of one sort of player. So why would you sell? Like, you just got an affordable price on a one for one. How about you see how this goes? Would be my thing for Chase Claypool. And again, maybe there's one-ish player in every class at some position that sort of applies like this.
I think like that's right. That context is really, really important, which is the last part you just said. Maybe there's one player across all of the positions in each class.
Round 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Right. Maybe. Right. That's sort of I think that's a great framing of it. Right. Because I think far too often, well, this guy's the next, Calvin Johnson or whatever. Like, I actually thought that you could look at Chase Claypool and say, man, that's like a poor man's Mike Evans. right? From a size, speed, all that stuff. And he was a little bit less productive early on. And I think Evans was younger than him, but you could sort of like look at it and squint, right? But I would say, like, generally, that as a general rule, right, you're looking for outliers, but you're looking for
affordable
few
outliers.
of them, right? There's not a lot of them, right? You shouldn't make that bet at a high cost, and you shouldn't make that bet a lot, right? That if there's one or two a year, maybe, right? But it's not, oh, there's so many outliers in this class. Like, that's usually not the rule. I'll say the other thing too, like, I'm surprised that the rookie class has been this good. One of my big takes or thoughts coming in, operating premises, was that there'd be slow starts from rookies because of no rookie minicamp and no all this stuff. And maybe it's just the class is just that good, but that hasn't turned out to be true. I mean, maybe there's more stuff to draw from it. Maybe it's that Zoom is more effective than the chalkboard or whatever, right? I don't know. We'll see if there's more of that goes on. But I think that's been certainly a pleasant surprise, not something I really expected coming into this season.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we expected, again, the transition factor, the slow start factor, the lack of a preseason, lack of an off season, all of these things. And yeah, it really hasn't been that much. And and also, other than the tea leaves of depth charts and pecking orders and things like that, I remember, taking copious notes of the preseason, but I think other than the tracking of who's ahead of who and, maybe 2 or 3 really important running back tea leaves that we didn't get this year. Mike Davis would have been one that we would have had plenty of shares. James Robinson, exactly, would have been one to be quasi aggressive on really early during that whole process. So we pretty much had no or minimal indicators until we actually got week 1 or very, very close to it. So those are things I almost wonder, if you need to do as much or more blocking out than taking in, as we get into August. And I'm not going to say it's lying season, but it's boasting season. It is puffing up season, and it is don't overthink and don't overvalue season of said information and what is getting retweeted the most from beat writers or otherwise sources around the water cooler. So we'll see if we get games back. I do think that's instructive because they're actually putting players out on the field, and to me, it's more about the depth charts and mainly with running backs and things like that, or who's getting time with the ones, more so than who's producing or other ancillary things. I do want to mention this is episode 32 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show, and you should subscribe, rate, and review. The Football Guys, host of the Audible platform of shows on all of your podcasting platforms. Sign up for that Football Guys daily email update, which is delivered from Joe Bryant. It can be your daily guide to all your news, instant analysis. Don't have to be a subscriber. Again, there's so much value to becoming a Football Guys subscriber, but that email is going to be with you all the way through the Super Bowl, and it takes a little bit of hiatus, but it'll be right back to daily, right around the NFL draft and going straight forward all the way through, again, the following year. And just, you don't miss something. You don't miss, and especially in the off season, you get to see all of the free content through about mid-July that you can just click through the email. And then you're getting a bunch of information in season that you just don't want to miss. And again, that is footballguys.com/free to put your email on the list. As simple as that. Let's rapid fire a couple trades here. Again, trades aren't a huge part, but actually, so this will kind of tease out without looking at the 2021 class specifically, Jordan. But what do you think? So I guess the biggest thought here would be your thoughts on trading down in rookie picks way in advance, and what your thoughts should be, because this was 102 for next year, traded for a playoff pick next year, so 109 through 112 they say, plus a 2022 early to mid first. So you're kicking it out, but you are moving down. This is almost kind of what you just said, which is if you can operate within tiers, what if you're still getting a round 1 wide receiver this year? And then you're also, apparently this team finished with the 101 this year, and now you're getting that team's 2022 first. So projected non-playoff and obviously early potential.
Did it say super flex or not super flex?
I read it as 1 quarterback.
Okay. I was going to say, because if it's super flex, that's it's
an early proactive move. Yes.
Yes. If that's super flex, it's a killer for 102. I would say this. I like there might be a time where this makes a lot of sense to do. Right. There might be right. We might come to May and be like,
Is it
man,
Thanksgiving or is it Christmas or
no, it's May or late April, whenever the draft's going to be. Right. Then it's when you're on the clock. Right. I don't have a problem with this deal. And I love, like, generally speaking, I love these types of deals where you move down, pick a player in the same tier, kick a pick out, and then it's kind of like, it's you have money coming to you, right? You have future income, it's coming, and it's sort of there for you in the future with that first round pick, right? I love those types of deals. I don't like them in the November before the draft because 102, we don't know what's going to happen between now and April or May. I'm not sure if they've set a date for the draft yet, but we don't know what's going to happen. And when we don't know, you give up all that leverage, right? So if you're really high in a rookie draft, right, I don't have a problem trading down. But when you do so this early, you're giving up leverage that you don't need to, right? So the way I always think about this is when a lot of these trades is this deal ever going to go away, right? Like, you're trading picks right now with a contender in December. Is this a trade that's not going to exist?
Well, you're assuming they're trading with the contender. What if they're trading with the team that has the 101, that had the 101 or does have the 101? Now they're getting 102 and they had someone's playoff pick. So they might be trading their own 2022 first away.
Yeah, maybe. But my thought is just when you don't need to do this deal now if you're selling the 102. If you're sort of going to move up already, I think that's I hate selling future first. So to be on the flip side of that. But I think you gain a ton of leverage by being that high in a rookie draft for the entirety of the offseason.
Right, because we know already that it would be worst case. That is wide receiver 1, which this year could be a top 5 or top 10 NFL draft pick with a really good profile, or it could be running back 1 who landed with good enough pedigree. If it's round 1, not round 1, a glorious landing spot. You just hold all these cards for having the hot name or having the buzz that entire process. I will say, ancillary point to this deal, because I agree with you about the timing is just all wrong, that you do have these teams that get itchy and want to trade their future picks beyond the current year almost as soon as they get them.
Right.
So now I don't know when this 2022 pick was able to be traded and it goes into everybody's. Usually it's not randomly during the regular season or something. But my point is, if they are willing to trade it like this, if you didn't trade for it, someone would. So now, whether it was a trade up or for an early pick in 2021 or something else, that point, you want to know what teams generally trade their picks, where they trade them away proactively a year in advance. And then guess what? Then they want to trade back in when May comes around because they're left out of the party. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they just like trading their picks away. But you need to know that because, and I have a few leagues and a few teams that do exactly this, which means you need to know when those picks get released and you need to send offers. Because if you don't, you will see a trade in your email of someone doing exactly that, because they're probably going to try to trade the pick proactively, or a few other owners will think the same way you do. And so you need to be aware of the market with certain teams, because if they're going to trade them away, at least know someone else might get a deal and you weren't even involved. So you want to at least show up and send invitations is what I would say. One other one.
Love that.
One other one. All right. So we have the Michael Thomas, aka the undesirable. We have Michael Thomas and a late second assumptive this year for T. Higgins, hot girl at the dance, alert, high school cheerleader, T. Higgins, Jacoby Myers, who doesn't count in this trade, and a late first. So you're actually going. This is actually, you're moving down.
This is unbelievable.
And moving Higgins to Michael Thomas. So I actually feel like, considering some of the heat, now maybe if Joe Burrow was playing this whole time, maybe it would be flip those picks because T. Higgins was white hot not long ago. So how many historical tinglies are going off right now for you?
Oh man, I just give me some Michael Thomas. If this is what we're gonna do, right? I don't usually get up to 50% rostership of a player at wide receiver. I do at running back all the time, but not at wide receiver. Like this could be an all-timer for Michael Thomas. I mean, just take the guy on the Hall of Fame track at a discount, right? That's a historical winning bet to me. So that's what I would do here.
Yeah, and so this would be a case where you're fine giving up a first.
Yeah, and I'll say this, right? I think as a general rule, I'll give up a future first in a deal if it is to go up and get a top
auto start
25 to 30 player. I think
that's the way to get the deal
general rule. Yes, that's a general rule for me. And because otherwise, and like I do a lot of my Dynasty processes to try and incorporate other things from outside of Dynasty into Dynasty, right? So you sort of look at and I call it the teams playing on credit. Like the Philadelphia Eagles right now are playing on credit. Like how much dead money are they taking through Alshon Jeffrey and Carson Wentz and Deshaun Jackson, all these guys, right? They're just paying down the line, and that's all well and good until it's not. And then when it's not,
Saints are too. Yeah.
Really, the Saints are. It really, really hurts when you're not, right? Houston, right? Like, don't you think they wish they had their first round pick?
Well,
And you know, so
you could at least be contending if you're gonna be financially unsound, is what we would say, right? At least the Saints are pushing for something significant. The worst case, well, and this is the Dynasty example, right? You don't have your first and second round pick this coming year, and you didn't make the playoffs,
right.
Hopefully, you got a good deal on those picks.
Yeah, that didn't help you this year. But so I hate playing on credit, right? I think it's because you have no outs, right? It's like playing a poker hand, and you've lost after the flop, and you're like, I don't really have any way to win this, right? And you sort of look at outside of this, right? Teams in the NBA. I mean, the Houston Rockets right now, right? Their best player doesn't even want to come to camp, right? And they've traded away picks forever. Based around trying to get him a championship to win, and he doesn't want to be there, right? Like, how dangerous is that, right? And so I just think all of those things, it really speaks to you want to have flexibility and you want to have players. So I will trade a future first, and I did it for Barkley this year. I got a discount on Barkley. So I would say, like, by and large, I won't do it, but if I get a discount, I'll do it. And I got a discount on Barkley, and I took it, right? So that's the types of deals that I'm looking for to trade my future first for. So I'm fine doing this.
Yep. Good stuff there. Again, in this episode, we discussed some of the macro points we've learned dating all the way back to rookie draft season through week 13, finishing up the fantasy regular season here in 2020. Reminder about signing up for that Football Guys email update at footballguys.com/free. And again, we have this show, we have the Audible, On the Couch. We mentioned those in passing. We had Dynastyer, Adam Harstead was on. It was an abbreviated show On the Couch with Sigmund Bloom this week, but still 25 minutes that you want to listen to. And I'm sure he'll be back on to finish that conversation in the near future. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.